And this ends years of diplomatic deep freeze and signals seismic shifts for the entire international order, Ukraine and even India. The diplomatic freeze on Putin ends whilst Ukraine's President Zelenskyy braces for a seismic tremor from a summit that he's not even been invited to. Both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin step into the summit with clear-cut agendas, but the advantage tilts in surprising ways. Let's tell you, for Putin, the meeting is more than negotiation. It's redemption of sorts. And this is the first interaction between US and Russian leaders since the Biden-Putin summit of June 2021. The first Trump-Putin handshake since Japan 2019. And the first visit by a Russian leader to Alaska since Russia sold it to the United States more than 150 years ago for $7.2 million at 2 cents per acres rate. The venue is the joint base Elmendorf-Richardson, and the agenda is to find a solution to end the Russia-Ukraine war. But the subtext is equally important as well. Both these sides want to size up the other's demands and test, of course, how far each is going to be willing to bend. For Vladimir Putin, this summit is already a win. It gives him international legitimacy to be seen on equal terms with the US president after being branded an outcast. His diplomatic isolation also ends after being shunned since the Ukrainian invasion. And it is also a boost for his domestic image as a strongman who stares down Washington right in the eye. But for Donald Trump, it's high risk, high reward as well. A chance to project himself as the global peacemaker who can do what Biden could not. But there is a risk factor here as well, being seen as conceding too much and too quickly. As for Ukraine's Vladimir Zelenskyy, the fear is real if territorial concessions are decided in rooms where Kyiv is absent. Zelenskyy has already said that it is time to end the war and the necessary steps must be taken by Russia. We are counting on America. And on the other hand, you've got US President Donald Trump, who's in that press gaggle on his way to Alaska, said that if Russia does not pay heed to those demands, there are going to be major and big consequences for Russia. But tonight, there's also an India angle, because what happens in Alaska may not stay in Alaska. This summit isn't just about Russia and America. It's about global power, global realignment, economic pressure in the lives of millions from Ukraine to India. And from the ramparts of the Red Fort today, Prime Minister Narendra Modi asserted that the government would never ever compromise on the interest of its farmers. A subtle message directed at US President Donald Trump amid a stalemate over a trade deal. Listen in.
भारत के किसान, भारत के पशुपालक, भारत के मछुआरे, ये हमारी सबसे बड़ी प्राथमिकता है। भारत के किसान, भारत के मछुआरे, भारत के पशुपालक, उनसे जुड़ी किसी भी अहितकारी नीति के आगे मोदी दीवार बन के खड़ा है। भारत अपने किसानों, अपने पशुपालकों, अपने मछुआरों के संबंध में कभी भी कोई समझौता नहीं स्वीकार करेगा।
Well, if you remember, the US Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he said that if the talks fail, the tariff on India could increase manifold. Is this Donald Trump's strategy now? Pressure India to curb purchases of discounted Russian oil, use tariff threats to protect US interests and steer global energy markets. But the big questions that we're trying to decode tonight: will the Donald Trump-Vladimir Putin talks in Alaska affect US tariffs on India? Is there more at stake for Donald Trump's reputation than for Vladimir Putin's position? So much that's hanging in the balance, and all eyes on that mega Putin-Trump Alaska summit. Joining us here on the broadcast to put all of this into perspective, Vlada Galan, President and Chairman, the Board of International Ukrainian Crisis Fund, joining us live from Georgia, United States of America. Many thanks for joining us here. Ambassador Suresh K. Goyal, former Indian diplomat, always a pleasure to have you with us. Julia Melnikova, Head of Program, Russian International Affairs Council, joining us live from Moscow. And Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, Defense and Strategy Expert. Very warm welcome to you, General, once again. Well, Ambassador, let's get the snowball rolling here. We've got an expert view of what's happening in Kyiv, what's happening in Russia as well, at the hands of Vlada and Ms. Melnikova. But Ambassador, Putin's first US visit in a decade, and it's so ironic that it's happening in Alaska, a portion that they ceded to the United States way back for mere 2 cents per acre. Does it mark the end of his pariah status? Is this rebranding of Vladimir Putin, or is this just transactional diplomacy? That's the big question that we're trying to decode here as well, because just the fact that Putin is going to be sharing the stage with Donald Trump seems to be that those sanctions and that sort of pushing him away, obliviating Vladimir Putin on the global stage, that all comes to an end now.
Kabir, thank you very much. Just 2 or 3 things here.
Yep.
First of all, those who said that the Cold War had ended with the dissolution of Soviet Union, what is happening now proves how mistaken they were. Because the Cold War was not just about the dissolution of Soviet Union. The Cold War was about the two superpowers and how they work with each other, whether it is Russian Federation or it is USA, or now the upstart, China. China, which actually has overtaken Russia already, and China is now contesting the USA, but it's all really about who shall command and who shall be controlling the world politics, okay? That is number one. So number two, you're right. Putin and Trump meeting face to face with each other in Alaska, whether it was sold at 2 cents per square meter or whatever it is, the fact is that it is now part of the USA. The fact is that Alaska is part of the Arctic, where Russian Federation and the USA are again colliding with each other. And whether Europe will have a role in that collision or not is entirely to be discussed later on. But the fact is that the two superpowers are again coming face to face with each other to decide who will be actually giving the command. It's important. Lastly, India. It's not about India at all. It's about really who shall be the alpha.
But isn't that going to affect India? The ripple effects are going to come to, of course, the Bay of Bengal as well.
No, I'm sorry. I think we are looking at it entirely from the point of view of supply of the Russian oil to India. It's not about supply of Russian oil to India.
Okay.
We can always supplement or we can always replace it with oil from other countries. It's really about who actually can they dictate to. Why can't they tell China not to buy oil from Russia? They can't. Trump is dependent upon China for the critical minerals, and therefore Trump cannot dictate to China. Therefore, again it comes to geopolitics and the geoeconomics, and in those terms, it's really who shall we basically live with now.
But is this is about Ukraine at the center and its focus, right, Ambassador?
No, I'm sorry. No, but this is what I said. Ukraine is an excuse. Ukraine is a reason, yes. But then why isn't Ukraine there? Why
so essential alpha posturing. That's a great question. Let's bring in Vlada Galan, President and Chairman, the Board of International Ukrainian Crisis, joining us live from Georgia. From Kyiv's point of view, Vlada, how dangerous is a US-Russia deal in Alaska where Ukraine is the focus and Kyiv is not even present in the room?
I think it's absolutely realistic that Trump and Putin meet in this format. I think no one was disillusioned that Ukraine was going to be at the first talks. This is not the first time it has happened. We are not going to have a peace deal coming out of these talks. I think that's also an unrealistic expectation. But what I think that we hope to see, every Ukrainian and Vladimir Zelenskyy especially, certainly hopes to see a ceasefire come out of this and then a trilateral meeting to follow after these talks. That is a realistic perspective to have going into these talks and what we hope to see certainly coming out of those talks. Of course, I think many Ukrainians are disappointed not to see Zelenskyy at the first talk, but I don't think it's unrealistic going in. This is what we've seen in the past. This is the way that Trump chooses to do things. He's really quite transactional.
Well, it seems like we're having some sort of technical difficulty with Vlada. We'll quickly sort that out. On the other side of the divide is, of course, Russia. General Kulkarni, I'm going to come to you in just a bit. Let me quickly get across to Julia Melnikova and get a sense of what's happening inside Moscow as well. Julia, inside Moscow, is Putin selling the Alaska trip as a peace mission, or is this a diplomatic victory lap? How does one view it?
Well, there has definitely been a lot of talking about that in the media, and the media has been all hyped up to sell this as a possible platform to create a peace deal conditions. But I would side with the ambassador here and a little bit put myself in the middle of what he said and of what Vlada has just said. So it is definitely not for Russia, for Putin, it's definitely not about any peculiarity itself. Although the crisis is, of course, very important. It's the heart of the Russian foreign policy, and Russia's relationship with both India and China is super important, and selling oil to China and India is also very important. But for Putin, what is extremely important, what is of the first and foremost importance, is to sell this as the final diplomatic victory to bring the West to the table, because Russia is positioning the conflict in Ukraine as the Russia-West conflict related to the very structure of the world order. So for Putin, it was extremely important to have his counterpart at the table, and Zelenskyy is not the counterpart for him to resolve this crisis or to discuss any other issues. So what he actually wanted was to have the US in front of him. And this is definitely the victory if we sell it like this.
All right. And if the summit does produce a United States and Russia thaw, Julia, does Moscow expect India to remain a priority trade partner?
Of course. India is a priority trade partner, and relationship between Russia and India is not something connected to the current international agenda. It's a relationship rooted back into history, and it has its own dynamics and, of course, its own importance. So Russia expects this relationship to follow its own direction, not something dependent on the current international events.
All right. Vlada is back with us. Vlada, please continue your thoughts. I've got to go to General Kulkarni next.
I think the big question that we've seen discussed in the last 24 hours is what happens next? What happens if there is not a desirable result, there is not a ceasefire to come out of this? I think what you're going to see is Trump heat up and ramp up the stakes. You're going to see another round of secondary sanctions that's going to affect countries like India, like Turkey, Pakistan, Serbia, Iran, and many other partners that Russia has. That is what it's going to take to ramp up the pressure to see a result. Trump tried to be somewhat cordial with Putin, to bring him to the table, to open the door for dialogue. The first time it didn't work. I was in Kiev on July 4th on American Independence Day under heavy bombardment, over 500 missiles and drones coming in. And Trump was quite fed up after that point. You've seen the rhetoric change. And as he said, consequences will follow.
Well, attacks happening in the run-up to this particular meeting as well. And it seems like it's going to be the my way or highway deal that Donald Trump is throwing at Vladimir Putin. General Kulkarni, how are you looking at these developments? So much is happening in terms of diplomatic hectic parleys. Doval met Vladimir Putin. We're expected to see Prime Minister and Xi Jinping share the stage. If not, at the end of this month, maybe Vladimir Putin and Prime Minister Modi. And Lula da Silva says that there's going to be a virtual BRICS summit. De-dollarization, global realignments, 200 million barrels supply being shifted overnight. There's so much that hangs in the balance. All eyes on these developments. But Ambassador Goel says that this is about who's going to be alpha. It's the alpha posturing. What's your take on
that? Thank you, Kabir. See, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent national interests. And in that context, of the two Vladimirs, only one is on the table. Primarily because the intent of a bilateral talk, they're meeting after 7 years, and therefore to break the ice to begin with. However, Trump is coming on the board saying that he expects only a 25% success. So you don't go to a meeting with 25% success. That means he's definitely not 25% success, 50% max tariff on countries like India. I can assure you there'll be a 75% success should Mr. Trump be able to say that Ukraine will not join NATO. That's it. You'll have 75% success. As regards Ukraine is concerned, there are various ways of dealing. Ukrainians and the Russians can never be at war. Never be at war. They will be friends. They are after all siblings, whatever they might say. They are all siblings. They are all part of it. And they live in an environment. They can't afford to be enemies. They will not be enemies. They are known to each other. But notwithstanding all that, I think, yes, an unjust peace accord would definitely not be acceptable to Zelenskyy. Rightly so. He wants a just peace. Even if it's not on the table, whatever be done, as long as the interests of Ukraine are protected, so be it. Doesn't matter. We will see the next bilateral talk and a trilateral talk where Mr. Trump himself is saying that he would come on the table and he would bring Zelenskyy, he'll bring the Europeans also on the table. So that's perfectly fine. But yes, very important right now, because I sincerely feel that Mr. Trump has been wanting to have a peace in this particular, and he's put his, complete prestige at stake. Initially, he said 24 hours, didn't work out, it's in the 7 months. But right now, also that posturing, within 2 minutes, I will know, otherwise they'll leave it. That's not done, because you aren't going to threaten anyone. These are negotiations. You can't push Russia, because Russia is the country that can be pushed. You can't push Ukraine. It's a big, huge country with so much resources to this. And therefore, it's important, a little patience, a little bit of understanding of each other, sit down on the table, talk, discuss, and then...
I think that's what we're missing, General. That's what we're missing. Patience is what we're missing on the global stage right now. And Ambassador, you see, Sergei Lavrov, he's already said that we're not going to lose our stand. We're going to stare Washington down in its eye and tell them what we want. And this is going to be two leaders sizing down each other's demands. So if Sergei Lavrov is going to continue to stand his own ground, where is this going to lead us, Ambassador? Should we now brace for additional tariffs?
I said earlier, and I'll repeat it. Tariffs on India has nothing to do with what is happening in Alaska. Alaska is entirely about the tough war or the war as to who is numero uno between who actually have the final influence in Europe. Let me begin from the beginning. Where did Ukraine begin? Ukraine wanted to become the member of NATO. Europe actually led it on the garden path, saying that yes, you can become the member of NATO. And then when the crunch came, they all backed out. For Russia, that was the final frontier. Russia, even in 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved, had made it very clear that NATO should not expand beyond a certain limit. In fact, once Soviet Union dissolved, where was the justification for NATO? It continued. Whose security? What security? If there is no leftist camp now in Europe, so what are you defending against? So the whole thing really is a question about now if USA-led NATO wants to control Europe, or is it Russia who wants to really defend its own interest? That's a problem. And therefore, Alaska is going to be again about who has his say, whether Russia continues as it is, whether Ukraine listens to Russia, or Ukraine actually is given a say, and Ukraine whether joins NATO or not. It's all a question about geosecurity. And therefore, India, as far as the tariffs are concerned, our tariffs depend not on what happens in Alaska. Tariffs on India will depend upon what Trump wants, what happens between the USA and China.
All right.
Yes,
all right. Well, Vlada, let me come to you next. The surreptitiously leaked reports tell us that Russia reportedly demands Ukraine cede all of Donbass and some other nearby regions as well. How realistic is it that the Volodymyr Zelensky-led government is going to be okay with that?
The government is not going to be okay with that, and the Ukrainian people are not going to be okay with that. Vladimir Zelensky understands that if he were to agree to such a deal, he would have a revolution on his hands internally and would be out of power very quickly before even any election took place, because the Ukrainian people absolutely won't stand for that. The problem here is that the victory and the bar for victory has been set very high. And I think that it's going to be very difficult to reach such a high bar of victory. That being said, giving up large swaths of Ukrainian land is off the table. Can there be a negotiation? Yes, there can be a negotiation and a deal can be made, but it's not going to involve giving 30% of Ukraine's territory. That's completely unreasonable and unrealistic. And let's face it, we're going into the fourth year of the war. Russia cannot afford for its partners to pull back, especially its oil partners. You're going to see a hit to the backbone of the Russian economy, which forces and puts problems in place for it to continue funding this war. On the flip side, Ukraine doesn't have enough foot soldiers to continue. Russians keep throwing bodies into the meat grinder of the front lines, but Ukrainians don't have that many bodies to be throwing at the front lines. They cannot do that. They have to fight strategically. It's been a very strategic, different type of warfare when it comes to Ukraine. And how long can they truly sustain that? But I think what we look at is how realistically and how the Russians are coming into the summit. Sergei Lavrov arrived at the summit wearing a USSR shirt, clearly just pointing out to the fact that they want to rebuild the Soviet Union. They're trolling the world and trolling Ukraine. But let's not forget, one of the things that led to the fall of the Soviet Union was the Afghan war. And this war has seen many more casualties, also an economic collapse. You're going to see that if these secondary sanctions go through after this. So I think both sides have to be very realistic going in. Ukraine has to be realistic. Certainly can't give up 30% of our land, but victory, the bar for victory has been set very, very high. We need to be a bit more realistic. And the Russians also need to be realistic that they only allowing them to take massive swaths of land is going to be like a Hitler and Czechoslovakia scenario. What else are they going to go for? When does it end? We already saw with Crimea that the appetite doesn't end. Vladimir Putin wishes to be like Peter the Great, but he's proven that he's much more like Ivan the Terrible. And that's very unfortunate. We certainly hope that the Russians will also be realistic in this situation.
All right, a lot of analogies used in that particular answer. It seems like Donald Trump's desperate for, a Nobel Peace Prize. Seems to be making phone calls on that front as well. Doesn't like Barack Obama having the last laugh with him having that award. And it seems like the press gaggle, I'm going to read out the latest statement, says no NATO membership for Ukraine. Donald Trump just put off the table any NATO format security guarantees for Ukraine. It won't happen, he said, ahead of the high-stakes summit with President Putin in Alaska. Now, Julia, let me come to you. Running out of time here. If the summit does produce a US-Russia thaw, how does Kremlin at that point in time view India's balancing act with Russia and the West? Because this is clearly a balancing act that we've been doing. And our Prime Minister today has made it quite clear that he's standing like a wall to safeguard Indian farmers, the Indian MSME sector and the Indian fishermen.
Yeah, Russia has been very appreciative of the stance that the Indian Prime Minister and India in general has taken ever since the beginning of the conflict, because India is pursuing its multi-vectorness policy, and this is actually the best that Russia could hope for at this point, because this is exactly how Russia sees the world order, like so that the poles, the centers of this multipolar world order could stand up for themselves and for their national interests. So there has been for a long time the discussion about India trying to balance between Russia and the West, but I think it's very well understood in the Russian government that for India it's also the matter of national interest. So while the policy is balanced and unless the policy is like unbalanced towards the West, I believe that Russia is very appreciative of India's independence and cautiousness in its foreign policy.
The task seems like a big balancing act of a couple of balancing acts together. General Kulkarni, we're completely run out of time. I'm going to give you the final say here. What happens? I mean, everybody's glued to the television screens when the planes are going to land, when the meeting actually happens. But when the joint declaration, the joint statement happens, if the two leaders come out smiling, if there's a little bit of a shake of hands, and then they say, look, we're still talking. I mean, what does a smiling picture, what are going to be the optics of a smiling Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, and then the handshake happens? What are you expecting?
Kabir, if Mr. Trump has said no NATO membership for Ukraine, he assures it, gives it in writing, 75% of the battle is won. That's it. It's 3-0 Trump. It's the Trump way. And of course, now Zelenskyy will be taken on the table, and of course, things will be sorted out. But the success, 75%, I give it a success. If Mr. Trump has said this, no NATO membership for Ukraine, because that's it. That's all over now. I think 75% Trump has his way. That's it.
All right, then. I think we're going to leave it there. Vlada Galan, President and Chairman, the Board of International Ukrainian Crisis, Ambassador Suresh K. Goyal, Julia Melnikova, Head of Program, Russian International Affairs, joining us live from Moscow, and General Kulkarni, always a pleasure to have you with us. All eyes on the big summit. Watch on Newsline to bring you all the latest details. We're going to slip into a quick commercial breather here. Top developments right on the other side. Associate sponsor, Dyna Premium Beauty Soap. पहली झलक करे खूबसूरत